Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. Richest pirates in history. Yarr. Blackbeard, probably the most notorious pirate in history, surprisingly ranks poorest among the wealthy pirates on this list, though he still made bank. Before the beard, he was known as Edward Teach, a small English chap born around the 1600s. History's forgotten the exact year, so we'll just go with it. In the same sense, not much is known about Little Eddie before he got his first facial pube, so let's fast forward a bit. In the early 1700s, the Caribbean was really going through it as the English, the French, and the Spanish duked it out for territorial control and dominance over trade routes in and around the Americas. One side effect of this conflict was the hiring of privately owned ships to attack and capture other ships. It was like a big game of rock, paper, scissors, but it was just guns, guns, guns. These private guns for hire were called privateers and were given written permission from their respective crowns to plunder and pillage any and all enemy ships to their liking. After all was said and done and the three crowns made peace in 1712, these privateers, who were used to being able to just ransack whoever they wanted to for all they were worth, were now out of a job. Oh. Well, legally speaking anyway. In fact, most privateers just kept up their shooting shiny ship shenanigans without a shadow of shame. And this is where the golden age of piracy began to peak and where most of these salty dogs made their fortunes. Eddie Teach was one such a privateer, having served under the English crown during Queen Anne's War in his youth. Around 1716, Eddie Spaghetti took an opportunity to make his fortune, joining a crew under renowned English pirate Benjamin Hornigold. After Teach had seized several small enemy ships and proved his worth, Hornigold was all, nice. And Teach was given more command. Eventually, Hornigold was ousted as captain after his refusal to attack fellow English ships that were just brimming and throbbing with gold. He was given a full pardon from the English crown and retired in peace. Teach was elected as the new captain and was thrilled at the new venture, as he could now do things his own way. Almost immediately after his promotion, the crew had captured the ironically named French ship La Concorde, meaning harmony in English. Now sure, one can expect a few casualties when a ship is absolutely reamed from both sides with cannon fire, but this was a slave ship, and this is how slave ships were packed. Surrendering immediately, the ship was taken and any surviving slaves were set free on a nearby island, to be recaptured later. Okay. The brand spanking new vessel was given a makeover, having 40 cannons slapped right on that thing. The ship was repurposed as Teach's flagship and renamed to the Queen Anne's Revenge. Now an absolute powerhouse, Teach took to the seas to seek his fortune. His most prominent tactic, of course, was intimidation. Not only did he have a brand new ship well equipped to rip any opposing vessel 40 new assholes, but his menacing appearance alone would surely make you pucker your own in fear. As his nickname implies, Blackbeard had a long, jet black beard entwined with various lit fuses. This gave him a terrifying demonic look, which was quickly offset by the smell of burning hair. But if you were sailing your sloop and saw this coming up in your rearview mirror, you just about shit a brick. For a couple years, Blackbeard terrorized the Carolinas, seizing ships and taking hostages. But across the Atlantic, English King Gentleman Dude George I was kind of getting sick of pirates. He offered free pardons to anyone willing to throw in the smelly towel and a free rope necklace to anyone that didn't. Blackbeard took the offer, but fell right back into piracy when the opportunity presented itself, which was immediately. Well, the governor of Virginia took matters into his own hands and assembled a team of pirate hunters to cut down the callous captain. In the wee hours of the morning on November 22nd, 1718, Blackbeard was ambushed by the Royal Navy, and his crew was slaughtered. Blackbeard himself sustained 20 stab wounds and 5 gunshot wounds. Although short-lived, Blackbeard's notorious pirate career amassed a pretty penny. It's estimated that his plundering racked up about $240,000, or about $18.5 million, adjusted for inflation in 2025. In the end, Blackbeard's head was severed and his body disrespectfully dunked in the drink. His melon was mounted as a warning to any and all future pirates, but an invitation to some. Born in the American colony of Massachusetts, Captain John Halsey began his sailing career as a privateer for the English crown in 1704. He started off by preying on French fishing fleets in the North Atlantic, but eventually preferred attacking Spanish ships near the Canary Islands off the coast of West Africa. This didn't last long, as his letter of marque, the English monarchy's permission slip to raid enemy ships, expired the very next year. Unable to legally loot and plunder, Captain Halsey turned to piracy and sailed further east into the Indian Ocean. The goal here was to intercept Mughal Empire treasure ships, but after several months of sailing around with no booty to show for it, crew morale was at an all-time low. This led to the aggravated crew jumping at any opportunity to score some simoleons. One day, a Dutch ship passed by Halsey and his crew, looking very vulnerable. Halsey, unwilling to attack and anger any European powers, shrugged it off and just kept chugging along. This elevated crew status from peeved to pissed, and Halsey was voted out of office, which is something the pirates did. If they felt like the guy in charge just wasn't up to snuff, they could just vote him out democratically, or metallically, depending on the crew. Halsey was metaphorically stripped of his captain duties, and the crew took it upon themselves to attack the Dutch ship, expecting it to be some pushover merchant equipped with nothing more than a single-shot pistol and a few why-I-oughtas. Turns out, not so. The Dutch ship, in fact, had several large cannons and a surplus of why-I-oughtas. The Dutch fired a warning shot at the approaching crew, and it was well received. The rogue cannonball managed to slightly injure the guy at the helm and took out a few armaments at the same time. The crew got the message and did a 540 out of there, immediately reinstating Halsey as captain with a collective "my bad," which it kind of was. On the next trip to shore, Captain Halsey disbanded the crew and formed a new, less mutinous one. Still seeking his fortune, John Halsey found himself in the Red Sea in 1707, where he encountered not one, not two, but 5 heavily armed English warships. "What's the move, Captain?" "We move forward." "Sir, we're heavily outgunned and outmanned, don't you think?" Did I stutter? Well, yeah, you kinda did. "I said forward." Okay, damn, I spit in my face. Halsey and his crew stared down 5 massive warships, each one more English than the last. Seeing such a paltry crew, the English warships said frigate and inexplicably retreated. In the confusion, Halsey and his crew managed to capture 2 of the 5 warships before the rest completely buggered off. The crew returned to shore in 1708 to celebrate their well-deserved victory, but Halsey would never return to the sea. The 2 warships, along with their cash and cargo and various other small loot from Halsey's pirating career, are valued at around $19.4 million in today's money. It's just too bad that shortly after making port, all 3 of John Halsey's ships were ripped apart by a hurricane and sank. He lost his fortune, but at least he still had his health. Just kidding. He died of a fever shortly after the storm at the age of 45-ish. Sure, you can face 5 galleons strapped to the keel head on, but God forbid your body temperature goes up a few degrees. Yep, that Captain Morgan. The one responsible for many a college headache and morning walks of shame. But before he got a leg up on the rum business, he was quite the headache to the Spanish in the mid-1600s. Born Henry Morgan around 1635 in Wales, fate would bring this young fella to the Caribbean of all places. It's unknown exactly how he got there. He could have been part of an expedition, served as an apprentice, who knows. All we care about is that it's the 1660s and Morgan is now in the Caribbean, setting up his home base in Jamaica, which was recently captured by the English. Around this time, Jamaica was developing into a reputable trading hub, revving up its plantation business and seeing roughly 1,500 privateers spend their spoils on the local economy. Morgan sailed under English privateer Sir Christopher Mings as a captain, and together, the crew ransacked Spanish settlements and cities across the Caribbean and Central America. Jamaica did eventually come under threat of invasion from the smelly Spanish, so Captain Morgan was promoted to the much less marketable Admiral Morgan and was put in command of 12 ships and about 700 men. Through his letters of marque from the English crown, Morgan had permission to attack Spanish and Dutch vessels at sea. The problem, though, is that ships hold significantly less goods for the stealing than, say, an entire town. Though he was not legally cleared to do so, Morgan began attacking Spanish strongholds between the years of 1667 and 1671. His exploits netted him millions in Spanish bribes to spare towns and cities, and by the time he attacked Panama City in 1671, Morgan had over 30 ships at his command and hundreds of crew members, by far the largest across the Spanish Main at the time. Now, in order to take down this Panama City where the gold coins gleam and the girls got titties, Morgan sent a well-armed and well-trained party of 300 men, which clashed against roughly 1,600 inexperienced Spanish soldiers. And to say that the Spanish got their shit slapped would be an understatement. The Spanish forces saw between 400 to 500 casualties, with Morgan only losing 15 men. Panama's governor, now cornered, decided that instead of allowing Morgan to take the city, he would instead burn it to the ground. After Morgan claimed his victory, the city erupted in flame as the surviving Spanish troops set fire to the city. The blaze lasted until the next day, where Morgan and his crew plundered whatever goods weren't burnt to a complete crisp. They burnt the spices. They burned the gold. They burned me. Since what he did was technically illegal, Morgan was arrested but was never charged with any crime, and was instead formally knighted for his undying loyalty to the English crown. He did make his way back to Jamaica and served in a government role with the goal of eradicating piracy from the Caribbean waters, but he eventually fell out of power and fell onto the bottle, becoming a depressed alcoholic. In his final years, Morgan made sizable investments in plantations, owning 3 along with 131 slaves to work them. On August 25th, 1688, Henry Morgan died of complications from his heavy drinking at the age of 52. Across his very successful pirating career, Morgan's total captured booty is estimated to be worth around $19.6 million, adjusted for inflation. Although he died a drunk, his spirit lives on in your local alcohol store as an ironic proof of his spicy exploits. Remember to pour one out for the captain, who was really an admiral. Jean Fleury's story is one of luck rather than tactic. This time, we're gonna jump back to the 1520s, right about the time that Hernán Cortés had finished steamrolling the Aztec Empire. With seemingly endless spoils for the Spanish crown, Cortés sent 3 loaded treasure galleons back to Spain, and they almost made it back home. Almost. Enter Jean Fleury, a French privateer on the lookout for any Spanish ships who need a sinking. Stationed in Portugal during the 4 Years' War, which pitted France against the Holy Roman Empire, as well as Spain, Jean Fleury was in the perfect position to intercept Spanish and trade resupply ships. In early 1522, the 3 Spanish treasure galleons with gold blowing out their poop decks were spotted on the horizon, on the home stretch to Spain. Jean saw the small Spanish fleet and said, "No way, Jose," but in French. Fleury unleashed a flurry of cannons and quickly overtook 2 of the 3 ships before they could reach safer waters. Content with capturing the ships, Jean had no idea what he had stumbled upon. Below deck, the ship's holds were crammed and jammed with mountains of stereotypical pirate treasure, stacks of glistening gold, glittering jewels, exotic animals, and various rarities for the taking. Jean Fleury hit the jackpot, and with the score of a lifetime, he could have retired as a wealthy man. But that's for quitters, and real men know that the grind never stops. With knowledge of Spain's incredibly stacked ships, Fleury set out with his own fleet to try his luck at chasing that high. He and his crew managed to capture over 30 Spanish ships within the year, but couldn't find a fortune like the one before. The Spanish just about had enough of the Frenchmen, and eventually captured, tried, and hanged the greedy little bastard in 1527. Fleury's amassed wealth was heavily carried by his first score, but nonetheless, his pirating career netted him about $47.1 million. But as Fleury found out, you can't take it with you. Big Black Bart was one of, if not the most successful pirate during the golden age of piracy in terms of vessels captured. The first detailed records of Black Bart, aka Bartholomew Roberts, dates back to 1719 when he was the second mate on a slave ship stationed off the Gold Coast of West Africa. It was here that the ship was captured by Welsh captain Howell Davis. Roberts and surviving members of the crew were forced to join Davis's ranks. But Davis found some value in Roberts, not only because he was a skilled navigator, but also a fellow Welshman. When you come across someone who speaks your native tongue, you're gonna bro it out, which is what happened.
Hello.
Davis and Roberts would have long conversations in their funny little language that none of the other sailors could understand. Through these little chit-chats, Davis convinced Roberts that, yo ho ho, a pirate's life was for him. Roberts was hesitant at first, but the idea grew on him when he realized that a life of piracy could, at best, lead to riches, and at worst, provide a short but adventurous life. Much better than being a wage slave to the man. Take that, capitalists. Instead, Roberts pulled himself up by his bootstraps and found a way to steal livelihoods away from hard-working folks. As such an inspirational captain, Roberts really looked up to Davis. But then Davis done got shot by the Portuguese. Roberts, recognized as a close companion to the now dead Davis, was elected as the new captain, much to the dismay of the Portuguese, who very quickly learned a demonstrative definition of the word revenge. Roberts, now in command, really fell into the role of a pirate captain. He began capturing ships left and right, and on an expedition to Brazil, encountered a large fleet of 42 Portuguese ships. Roberts was able to locate the richest ship in the fleet by using the simple tactic of asking nicely. And which one has the most gold on it? Oh, well, it's that one right over yonder. Oh, thanks. Roberts continued his successful spree of ship stealing for the next few years, with his crew growing fiercely loyal. To maintain order and morale, Roberts developed his own pirates code, a set of agreements and laws that would be upheld by every crew member, bringing law to lawless men. Roberts was also one of the early adopters of the infamous Jolly Roger's skull and crossbones black flag. Flying the Jolly Roger was a great way to tell your targets that shit was about to hit the fan should they choose to stay and fight. Most didn't. In fact, in 1720, Roberts and his crew made their way up to Newfoundland, entering a harbor with their black flags whipping in the wind. Any and all surrounding ships' crews abandoned their post and fled. Roberts took the town, 22 merchant ships, and 150 fishing vessels without firing a single shot. Across his entire piratical career, Roberts yoinked over 400 ships, making him the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. His plunder is valued in the ballpark of $48.2 million. His career was successful, but all good things must come to an end. On February 10th, 1722, a British Royal Navy ship ambushed Roberts and fired a volley of grape shot broadside. Grape shot, if you're unaware, were basically giant grenades, several small iron balls a few inches in diameter densely packed in a canister designed to take out enemy crewmen. Well, poor old Roberts caught a ball right in the throat as he stood on deck, killing him instantly. He was 39. As you can probably tell, active pirate careers were pretty short. Most died right when the getting was good. A simple rogue cannonball, splinter of wood, or a stray cough could cut down a pirate where he stood, and Captain Thomas II was no exception. Beginning his privateering career at the tail end of the 17th century, Tommy II was commissioned to ravage a French factory on the coast of West Africa. Sailing across the pond from Bermuda alongside one Captain George Dew, both men had a lot to do. But Mother Nature had other plans. Glad that wasn't us, right? Y'all want to be pirates? Okay,
Yeah,
sure. Okay,
sure. Yeah.
I can hear you. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
All right. I can hear you. I can hear. The two crews set sail for the Red Sea, an area chock full of wealthy ships seeping out of every orifice. Like that one. Tommy's first big score was an Indian sloop headed for the Ottoman Empire. The vessel was captured without much effort and was certainly one for the books. Hidden in the hold was millions of dollars worth of gold and silver, with millions more worth of spices, ivory, gemstones, spices, silks, and spices. Tommy II sailed to a pirate haven on Madagascar to divide the plunder before making his next move. Several months later, II grew a new crew and set sail to wreak havoc once again. It did not end well. While pursuing a 25-ship fleet leaving the Mughal Empire, II engaged one of the lagging ships. Said ship turned about to face his attacker and fired a volley of cannons. One of these cannonballs practically split II in two, disemboweling the captain and killing him instantly at the age of 44. Fuck! It is estimated that II's piracy career netted him over $151.9 million in captured goods. There is a lot to say about Sir Francis Drake, but this video is already getting long enough by my standards, so like an enthusiastic Tinder date, I'm gonna trim it up for you. Sir Francis Drake was an English explorer and privateer and one heck of a sailor, starting off as a humble seaman and eventually circumcising the globe. Well, that's not right. Now that's better. Very early on in his career, Drake grew an incessant hatred and distrust for any and all Spaniards. And now, before you think he's racist, it's because the Spanish wouldn't let him break into the West African slave trade. From then on, Drake vowed to attack any Spanish possessions he came across in the future, which he did. He started making good on this promise in 1572 by attacking Panama, a Spanish transfer site of silver and gold from the Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean Sea. Drake and his men raided the area. Despite getting shot in the leg, Drake made off with literal tons of precious metals, making him and his crew rich and famous practically overnight. It was also at this time that Drake became one of the first Englishmen to lay eyes on the Pacific Ocean, letting out an iconic English roar of excitement. Drake vowed that he would one day sail those waters in the future, which he did. Beginning in November of 1577, Drake was granted a fleet of 6 ships and set sail from Plymouth to... Trying again in December of 1577, Drake was granted a fleet of 6 ships and sailed from Plymouth to circle the globe, eventually limping back home in 1580. Along the way, however, Drake made it his mission to be as disruptive to the Spanish as possible. Just 1 year into the voyage, 6 ships were whittled down to just 1. Drake's flagship, the Golden Hind. Making it past the southernmost tip of Chile, Drake began bombarding the western coast of South America, ravaging Spanish towns and seizing Spanish ships, one of which was the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, which housed over 29 tons of silver bars, silver coins, gold, and jewels. Drake was so tickled pink by this score that he spared the captured ship's crew, even gifting them small amounts of the treasure as they went on their merry way. Fast forward 2 years and 1 global circumnavigation later, and Drake's back home in England. The Queen knights him and everyone briefly claps. He then did some boring political nonsense before hopping back on the saddle and obliterating the ever-loving fuck out of some Spaniards, just like the old days. Speaking of old days, those are the types of days that Drake woke up to in his mid-50s. Still clinging to his youth, the withering and dusty seaman returned to Spanish waters back to where it all started, attacking Panama. Sir Francis Drake died of dysentery in 1596 and was hucked into the ocean in a lead coffin. Across his 33 years of piracy against the Spanish, Drake accumulated upwards of $170.3 million in goods and gold. Last on our list is the one and only Black Sam. No, this one. Despite being known as the single wealthiest pirate in recorded history, his pirating career lasted little more than a year. Black Sam was a real pirate's pirate and was renowned for his exceptional generosity and mercy as he boarded your boat and stole all your shit. The so-called Prince of Pirates began his career as almost all pirates did, in the Navy. During his teen years, Sam both metaphorically and quite literally got his feet wet in a few naval battles before branching off to a treasure hunting crew. But when searching for sunken gold didn't pan out, Sam chose to do the next best thing, a life of piracy. He managed to join the crew of one Benjamin Hornigold. Remember him? He's the pirate captain that Blackbeard served under in his youth. Well, as a reminder, Hornigold refused to attack English ships, much to the dismay of his treasure-hungry crew. Hornigold and Blackbeard broke away from the majority of the crew to go do their own things, like retire and die, respectively. The remaining crew, however, now turned to Black Sam Bellamy for leadership, and he took the job. About a year later in 1717, while sailing near Cuba, Bellamy and the boys came across the Witta Galley, a state-of-the-art English slave ship practically begging to be captured, which it was. After giving chase for 3 whole days, Bellamy was finally in range to fire a volley, and after the first shot, the captain of the Witta surrendered. On the ship was a fortune in gold, ivory, and various precious luxuries freshly gathered from the sale of over 300 slaves. The Witta was re-engineered into a flagship, being upgraded with more firepower for intimidation purposes, as Bellamy often captured ships with little destruction. It was also common that he would spare his captives, allowing them to flee on the very ships he captured, minus any goods of course. Can't make a profit on charity. His kind and reasonable demeanor granted him a very loyal crew, and it seemed like Sam had everything going for him. But fate had another idea. Just 2 months after the score of a lifetime, Bellamy sailed from the Spanish Main to the American Main. At around midnight on April 26, 1717, the Witta Galley was caught in a strong nor'easter storm and was quickly capsized and sank several hundred feet off the coast of Cape Cod. Bellamy and all but 2 of his 146 crewmen went down with the ship. Guys? In 1984, however, 267 years after its demise, the wreck of the Witta Galley was discovered, including Sam's treasure. Several tons of gold, silver, and gems were recovered from the site, as well as some human remains encased in debris. And these are suspected to be Bellamy's, though that is yet to be confirmed. Bellamy's exploits earned him a modern-day equivalent of over $177.5 million. That's about 0.045% of Elon Musk's net worth as of me writing this. Guess Sam should have worked harder. Hey guys, quick question. Have you ever had a situation where someone tells you a fact and you're like, psh, no way that happened, but they're all, no, it actually did, and you're all, no, really, stop lying to me. And the situation escalates really quickly to the point that you begin to question that relationship with the person who told you, and now you're minus 1 person in your life thanks to your own stubbornness? No? Well, get ready anyway, because here's some history facts that sound fake but actually aren't. Times were tough during the First World War and all hands were on deck for military equipment. For example, take a look at this German passenger cruise liner. Seems innocent enough, maybe take the family for a nice vacay, but Wait, slap a few huge guns on it and you've got yourself a formidable fortress of war, and that's exactly what happened to the SS Cap Trafalgar in 1914. She was stationed off of the coast of Brazil doing German war things, I guess, when the crew developed a dastardly plan. See, Germans of course were not the only ones to think of converting cruise liners into warships. Great Britain had their own HMS Carmania strapped to the keel with enough guns to make an American's pants feel tighter than usual. Well, the German crew decided to set up a trap for the British Navy by disguising their ship as the Carmania, giving it a fresh coat of paint and flying under the British flag. What the Germans didn't know about the Carmania was that it was stationed near Bermuda, north of where they were. The British knew Germans were doing some evil German war things off the coast of South America somewhere and went to sniff around. After a while, they spotted what they thought was another British ocean liner turned warship. "Hang on a tick," said the captain. "It's my ship, but it's over there. How can it be here too?" The captain did a double take to his own ship and then back to the other liner. Once everything clicked into place, the Carmania pursued the imposter. Ironically enough, the Germans were the ones who were taken by surprise and were like, "Oh fuck." And so they started to scurry, but then decided to do a 180 and engage the Carmania herself. After 2 hours of back and forth gunfire, the Cap Trafalgar was sunk by the very ship it disguised itself as. As I'm sure you know, World War II ended with the bombings of Japanese cities Nagasaki and Hiroshima using one of history's most devastating weapons, the atomic bomb. Even though Japan was one of the Axis powers and thus an aggressor during the war, the events were still truly tragic, as the vast majority of over 100,000 lives lost were innocent civilians, men, women, and children. Single bombs were able to level entire cities in seconds using unprecedented power. So, you'd be pretty unlucky if you were smack dab in the middle of both of those bombings. And that's exactly what happened to Tsutomu Yamaguchi. At age 29, he had spent the last 3 months in Hiroshima on a business trip and was about to head home. On the morning of August 6, 1945, he was walking out of his company's shipyard when he heard the American bomber overhead and noticed that it had dropped a small object attached to a parachute. Mr. Yamaguchi witnessed the blinding flash and was able to dive out into a nearby ditch. The shockwave ripped him from the ground and tossed him several feet in the air backward. Suffering severe burns and ruptured eardrums, he spent the night in an air raid shelter and was able to catch a train to his hometown the next day. His hometown of Nagasaki. After being treated in the hospital and going home, the absolute mad lad went to work the next day. His boss demanded an explanation for what happened in Hiroshima. When Mr. Yamaguchi discussed the bomb, his manager called him crazy since a single bomb couldn't wipe out an entire city. "Well, what did it look like?" asked the manager. Mr. Yamaguchi looked out of his office to see another blinding flash of light. "Well, something like that." The second atomic bomb devastated the city of Nagasaki, but fortunately left Mr. Yamaguchi relatively unscathed, and in the coming years he would become a spokesperson against nuclear weapons. He was officially recognized by the Japanese government as the only Niju Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person, though it is believed that as many as 165 people survived both bombings. If you're unaware, Alexander was pretty great. You don't get that title for nothing. At age 20, he was made king of his home country of Macedonia after his father kicked the bucket from an infectious disease called being stabbed with a knife. Once he assumed the throne, Alexander was all, well, time to conquer everything, I guess. And so he did. Beginning with his daddy's dream of kicking the ever-loving shit out of Persia, he then moved on to the Middle East and then Asia, where, yeah, he conquered that too, declaring himself King of Asia. This started to go to his head a little bit because he started to develop a god complex. He named many newly found cities after himself and even stamped his own face on the money. He thought of himself as a divine being because of all of his triumphs. Which, like, rightly so. I mean, whenever I get a sub 30 and a 16-star Super Mario 64 speedrun, I'm like, yeah, I'm the best. Across 11 years of conquering the lands, Alexander never lost a single major battle. But no matter how strong, notorious, or determined you are, you can't beat death. In 323 BC, at age 32, Alexander started to feel a tad ill. After suffering 12 days of excruciating pain, he passed away. Or so everyone thought.
The weird thing was that once he was declared dead, his body showed no signs of decomposition for over 6 whole days, which played into theories of his divinity. But since divine beings don't exist, ooh, hot take, modern day scientists now believe that Alexander the Great may have suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare disorder in which your immune system attacks your nerves. As a result, it is likely that Alex was fully paralyzed, but still very much alive, which explains why his body did not decompose. So, when he's being buried for being totally dead, he might have been completely conscious and aware during the entire burial. And that's worse than a sleep paralysis demon. The continent of Africa was an absolute free-for-all in the 1800s. Although there were many established civilizations and cultures, Europeans had a different idea. Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain were ever so gently colonizing every speck of land they came across on the African continent. The British Empire had a grand plan of colonizing the entire eastern seaboard, which included one particular island nation, Zanzibar. Sounds good, right? Well, not to the German Empire, no sir. So, after Zanzibar's pro-Britain Sultan decided to suddenly die under mysterious and poisonous circumstances, it was time for someone else to take the throne. The British Empire had previously declared that only a sultan with a British seal of approval could assume the throne. Well, some new guy decided to seize the throne for himself. He was the previous sultan's cousin and was in no way responsible for the previous sultan's poisoning. Nope. No way involved. So, being the new sultan, he told the British to go touch sand. As you can imagine, the British Empire did not take this too well, so they offered the new sultan an ultimatum: surrender the throne or get completely wiped off the map. "Ha! You and what army?" said the sultan. But it wasn't an army, it was a navy. The British Navy, with 4 heavily armed navy gunships all coincidentally pointed directly at the sultan's tough and durable wooden palace. The British instructed the Sultan to relinquish the throne by 9 a.m. that morning. Sultan believed this to be an empty threat and refused to back down. I told you guys, Britain was never going to. At 9:02, the Navy warships opened fire on the palace, reducing it to rubble almost instantly. At 9:40 a.m., the British guns fell silent. The Sultan was able to flee the palace in all the chaos and went into hiding, seeking refuge in a nearby German consulate. The palace completely surrendered, ending the war in just 38 minutes. By the end, 500 palace defenders perished, with only 1 British sailor being injured. The British assigned a new sultan that afternoon and all was well. Well, as well as it could be. Now, before I introduce our last fact, I'm gonna ask you to promise me to be a little bit more mature, okay? Alright. Come on, guys. I said be mature. You'd figure finding everything on our own planet would occur first before the exploration of our heavens, but that's not the case. Which I suppose makes sense since Uranus is bigger than Antarctica. Truth is, the celestial bodies above have been known for millennia. Obviously, the sun and the moon are hard to miss, but our ancestors were aware of our neighboring planets of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and even Saturn as far back as the 2nd millennium BC. It would be a few thousand years before the 7th planet, Uranus, was formally discovered in 1781. So, while dumb nerds were exploring the skies, huge dorks were still exploring our own planet, filling in the blank edges of the map. Take a look at this map. This was drawn in 1570, depicting the theorized land of Antarctica, back then referred to as Terra Australis, literally meaning southern land in Latin. Notice how Australia hasn't even been formally discovered yet, and how South America be lacking. Over the coming centuries, these land masses would be more accurately surveyed and marked. Along the southern tip of Chile, things got Chile. Sailors in the area noted extra strong winds and dense ice fields, which deterred further exploration. Since the borders of South America were now fully discovered, there wasn't much reason to continue into treacherous waters anyway. Well, not until 1820, where an expedition from the Russian Empire traveled beyond the wintry waves. Larger and larger ice shelves had been previously discovered, but of course, a man with a silly name would discover mainland Antarctica, just 3 days before the British sighted the frozen continent on an expedition of their own. Sucks to suck.
Dangerous cryptids and how to fight them.
Takalache are mischievous little critters whose only goal is to cause complete chaos, which is really annoying considering how relatively non-threatening they look. Originating from Zulu mythology in the South African country of South Africa, Takalache are said to be pale little gremlin or goblin-like creatures with big ol' kissable lips, grotesque pointy ears, hollow eye sockets, long bony fingies, and perhaps their most notable feature, a big gaping hole in their melon which is supposedly their source of power. Oh yeah, as if just causing a general ruckus wasn't annoying enough, the little guys also have the power to turn invisible. All they have to do is chug some water to plummet their opacity down to 0, then they're just free to slap your knees without being detected. It's pretty common amongst South African residents to hear tales of the Takalache, often as a deterrent to young children to not wander off or stay up late, lest one come in the night and munch their toes off. But if you ever find yourself confronted by one of these little fellas, there are a few things you can do to fight back. The most common tactic involves propping your bed up on some cinder blocks like it was a car left alone for 5 minutes in North Philadelphia. The added height will deter the miniature mongrel from being able to climb up and harass you. While you're pointing and laughing at the thing, take the opportunity to huck a lamp at it and knock it out cold. Next, tie the sucker up with some common bedroom rope and pour some of your healthy supply of spare battery acid down the critter's gaping head hole. That'll teach him. Time to take a trip down to like the one country any American knows in South America. Brazil. It is within this crime-ridden hellhole that you can find the Corpo Seco. It's a malicious zombie-like creature who was once just like you and me. According to Brazilian folklore, a corpo seco is created after a person dies and is rejected by both heaven and hell. Thus, the creature is cursed to roam the earth for all eternity with the sole goal of terrifying the living. Besides being a great reminder to stay hydrated, the corpo seco looks like your typical zombie, an emaciated corpse with completely dry skin and long fingernails. It's nothing but skin and bones. Actually, the name corpo seco translates to dry body, so that makes sense. Some Brazilian parents who want to keep their little crianças in line may offer a twist to the legend. Instead, they may insist that a corpo seco is created from children who disrespect or mistreat their parents. You gotta love good parenting. Little side note here, you ever go to like a Home Depot or a large hardware store where they have them big boxes up on the top racks? Yeah, no joke, my dad used to tell me that that's where they would put bad kids, and I'm a better person for it. Love you, Dad. Well, we all know that the best way to discard your run-of-the-mill zombie is to exercise your Second Amendment rights, or the Brazilian equivalent. Since the poor fellow has no muscular structure, he isn't going anywhere anytime soon, which allows you to get in some hefty target practice. Imagine you're just chilling on the calm high seas trying to catch some fresh tuna when all of a sudden, oh, come on. This is an umibozu, and he's pissed.
What you doing in my waters?
Umibozu are Japanese spirits described as several meter tall humanoid black figures which reside in oceans, seas, and bays. They are believed to be the vengeful spirits of monks who were previously murdered and cast into the sea. Don't know who's going around murdering monks and dunking them overboard, but hey, stuff happens. The calm ocean waves quickly turn into a chaotic nightmare as your ship is tossed and turned like a turd in a toilet. This all could have been avoided if you just sacrificed a little bit of your tuna catch, but shoulda, coulda, woulda. But fear not, there is a solution to this problem. Upon rising from the depths, the umibozu will demand a barrel from the sailors it encounters. If you present the barrel to the big nude dude, he will be most thankful, returning his gratitude by completely reducing your ship to toothpicks. Your best bet is to actually give him a bottomless barrel, which will just end up confusing the big umibozo as you laugh and sail away at a whopping 5 miles per hour. But if that also fails, you could always just radio in a volley of shells from the 460mm Type 94 triple turrets mounted on your backup battleship, the Yamato. There's nothing quite like a Filipino vampire baby to put a damper on your day, or night. Enter the Chinook, a chubby little Filipino vampire baby. But don't be fooled by its sort of non-threatening appearance, because they're actually pretty dangerous. Chinooks are said to attract human prey by lying on the ground near forest paths and crying their little heads off, prompting passersby to be like, "Can you shut the fuck up?" But some more altruistic pedestrians may approach the infant in an attempt to rescue it. Wrong move. Your empathetic nature just cost you your life. And that's what you get for trying to be a savior.
In your last conscious moments of severe torture pain, you may ask yourself, where did this Chinook even come from? While some believers in the Filipino community claim that the terrifying tyke is the offspring between a respectable young woman and a horrifying but equally respectable demon. After doing the do and slopping out the nefarious newborn, the new parents make like a tree and fuck off. This, understandably, angers the baby, who quickly develops abandonment issues while its mother brags to her friends about being dicked down by a literal demon. Thanks to multiple trauma-induced synapse connections, it has no choice but to seek vengeance on anyone unfortunate enough to come across it. Like you. So in the event that you approach an abandoned crying demon baby, be sure to quickly give it the old factory reset by jamming your finger into its soft spot. This will instantly calm the beast while simultaneously destroying all cognitive ability. Now, you can lease it out to sweatshops to make a steady side income. If you ever needed an excuse to stay away from the Arctic, the Kalapilawit might be what you're looking for. This absolute horror stems from Inuit mythology way up in the Great White North. Guaranteed to make anyone with thalassophobia's toes curl, the Kalapilawit waits just below the icy waters for a potential victim. They are described as scaly humanoid creatures with a female appearance and a unique but pungent sulfurous odor. So they're smelly fart fish women. According to legend, they are said to be child snatchers, preying on any unattended children wandering the Arctic beaches or playing on sea ice. So one moment you may be looking out at little Johnny Yes Papa having the time of his life as he ever so safely jumps up and down on drifting sea ice, while the next he is snatched up and dragged down into the watery depths. Once your kid is snatched, there's really not much you can do. They're doomed to reside in one of these stinky fish woman's many robe pockets. Or at least for as long as they can hold their breath. So how can you avoid or defeat the creature? Well, for one, don't leave your young children unattended in an Arctic setting, or really any setting. Kalapilawits aren't the only monsters out there willing to snatch kids up. But if you do want to have your child create memories of playing on the ice and you're sticking nearby, there's no shame in keeping your trusty mallet on hand. Oh boy, shadow people. Probably one of the most commonly spotted cryptids on this list. Heck, you may have even seen one recently, or will soon. They look like pretty much how you would think. They're just black figures with little to no discernible features, just menacing shadows of where people might be. While some may be more of a transparent misty figure, others can appear to be blacker than black, with you being able to see them in complete darkness. These things are terrifying and are one of the most common sleep paralysis demons. Speaking of which, perhaps one of the most famous shadow people is the Hat Man, a dark, foreboding figure that stares at you while you sleep in the darkest corner of your room. He is commonly depicted with eerily soft glowing red eyes and sporting a wide-brimmed hat. Just the sight of him alone is enough to make your blood run cold and your heart stop. Other shadow people are said to be detected out of the corner of one's eye but vanish when trying to catch a glimpse. So actually back in the day, I had this one incident where I was absolutely shredding on Guitar Hero 3. I was trying to get through FCP Remix on Expert, and I remember that my hearing just started going out. It was like I could only hear TV static. And not only that, I actually started getting tunnel vision, so my peripherals were blacking out and the TV static was getting louder and louder. But the moment that I actually started to take notice to it and I whipped my big dumb head around, that's when everything just kind of returned back to normal. So, I don't know if that was a shadow person or if I was just extremely sleep deprived and experiencing the side effects of staring at a screen and standing for several hours, but probably the latter. Anyway, if you want to avoid any and all shadow people from popping up in your life, there's really only one solution. You're gonna always need to be in a room that's brightly lit from multiple angles to eliminate any shadows. Sure, your sanity and your electric bill's gonna take a beating, but hey, at least you won't be seeing any shadow people. Ah, the bloop. Now this one's a bit of a mystery, as the only evidence for its existence is a small clip of audio picked up from a deep-sea hydrophone far off the coast of South America in 1997. The audio is of an extremely loud, low-frequency sound from the Pacific Ocean's darkest depths. The sound was actually so loud that it could be heard from over 5,000 kilometers, or about 54,000 Statue of Liberties, away. Take a listen. Some might think that the audio is just your dad mowing the lawn again at 7 in the morning, even though the HOA has told them multiple times to have the common courtesy to start after 9. But others find the audio to be distressing and mysterious, leading to rumors and whispers of the bloop, a terrifying aquatic supergiant that has proportions way beyond what we have previously known to be possible for deep-sea creatures. Some have argued that in order to produce such low-frequency vibrations, the creature would have to be over 250 feet long, over 2.5 times the length of a blue whale, the largest known animal on Earth. So is it a nightmare-inducing ultra-mega whale capable of casually deep-throating other whales? Or is it something a little bit more scientifically reasonable? Well, that's what a gaggle of smart fellas wanted to figure out, and through years of some pencil pushing, a lot of Greek letters, and additional audio recordings, a discovery was made. In 2005, scientists had confirmed that the bloop was audio captured from a non-tectonic cryoseism. Basically, some ice broke off of an iceberg somewhere. Well, since the bloop isn't actually a gargantuan monster and is just an iceberg, that means you can do this. Spring-heeled Jack, rarely referred to as Jumboots Jamstrang by a select few, is a humanoid cryptid that was active in Victorian England. This bouncy butthole is basically what kids thought life would be like when they begged their parents for moon shoes. The name is derived from the man-like creature's ability to perform acrobatic leaps well beyond the capabilities of any normal human, hopping up to rooftops in a single bound. Parkour! Looking like a rejected British Batman, Spring-heeled Jack was first spotted in the early 1800s in London, England, and he was quite the bastard, performing all kinds of despicable deeds, such as leaping onto carriages and crashing them, or assaulting young women and ripping their shirts with his metallic claws. The most famous sighting came from a young woman in 1838 who claimed that one night a man impersonating a police officer had lured her into the street. When she shed some candlelight upon him, it revealed a grotesque face and burning red eyes. She had claimed that the man spewed white and blue flames at her and leapt towards her, cutting her neck and breast with his sharp metal claws before being scared off by the woman's sister who came to the rescue. Just 9 days later, another young woman had a similar encounter, stating that a man had spit blue fire in her face and attacked her. And before you suggest it, no, Jack the Ripper didn't surface until 50 years after these incidents, so it's highly unlikely that it was the same person. So how do you fight back against a jumpy jerk like Spring-heeled Jack? Just keep a pocket knife on you. A good slice to both Achilles tendons will do the trick. This one's a real hoot. Originating from the Andros Island of the Bahamas, the Chick Charney is a big ol' barn owl. This ornithic nightmare stands at 3 feet tall with creepy long legs, a large wingspan, and humanoid arms used to twist the heads of its victims.
Mr. Owl.
Since it is but a simple owl, it possesses the ability of flight and exceptional night vision, but it can also somehow manipulate probability, allowing it to bestow good luck or bad luck. Give it to me straight, doctor. Is my wife gonna live? Probably. Wait, never mind. But it has to be said, even though it is a big dangerous bird, it's still a bird nonetheless. And what better way to get rid of a big old bird than with a big old musket? And with that, you now have what it takes to survive against some cryptids. You know, if they were real.
Hey guys, today we're gonna see how some small mistakes in history led to some pretty big consequences. So strap in with your favorite toothpaste and orange juice, cause here we go. King of Scots Alexander III was revered by his subjects as a kind and noble king, so he was a pretty cool guy. He put an end to an ongoing war with Norway with the signing of the Treaty of Perth. This stopped the invading Vikings from doing their stereotypical graping and pillaging and made them frig off back to Norway. The treaty also let Scotland gain possession of the Western Isles and the Isle of Man. With all this land expansion going on, as well as increased exports and cash flow, Scotland entered a bit of a golden age. Everything was pretty good until it wasn't. After all, no story is complete without some good old-fashioned character development from a Disney Pixar family tragedy. In the mid-1280s, King Alexander's wife, Queen Margaret, bit the dust, which was pretty devastating since they were married since childhood. Well, at least he had his own children to care for. Except for the fact that they all died too. Little Margaret Jr., who hilariously became Queen of Norway, expired at the age of 22 while pooping out her only child, a daughter named Margaret. We'll get to her later. Alex Jr. died on his 20th birthday at the age of 20. Don't know how he died either, sources just say he just died. The youngest child, David, also kicked an uneventful bucket at age 19. With his family tree essentially trimmed down to the trunk, Alex was desperate to generate new successors, so he married a French countess, Yolande of Dreux. She moved in with the king, but like in a different town for some reason. Well, one night the king was acting pretty eager to perform, so he set out to do the deed of sowing his seed, and nothing was going to block his urge to splurge. Nope, not even that. Despite pleads and warnings from bro-code breaking advisors, the king set out to get his dunk sunked. He had a few of his servants accompany him as guides, and they made it to the queen, but the king, on the other hand, got separated in the harsh storm and was subsequently yeeted off of his horse over a cliff where he was found the next morning, dead as a doornail. With no other heir, it was Margaret Jr.'s time to shine. But since she was only 3 years old and with the attention span of a goldfish, the political landscape of Scotland fell into ruin, ending the short-lived Golden Age, all because the king needed to slam some sweet queen skush. As I'm sure you know, the luxurious ocean liner Titanic was the ship of dreams that ended up becoming a complete nightmare. The ship died in 1912 after Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet distracted the two lookouts in the crow's nest from observing the giant fucking iceberg floating several hundred feet in front of them. Despite the crew's best efforts, the ship collided with the iceberg and got flushed into the North Atlantic a few hours later. Joking aside, it is believed that the entire disaster could have been prevented, or at least significantly reduced, if it weren't for one key mistake: an actual missing key. Lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were tasked with the important task of making sure that no icebergs were in the ship's path. In the crow's nest, the two men were equipped with a warning bell and a telephone to alert crew of any potential dangers in the chilled waters ahead. They also had one more tool: a pair of binoculars which were secured in a box. A locked box with a missing key. Apparently, this key was accidentally taken off of the ship before it set sail by Second Officer David Blair. What's this here in my pocket? Huh. I'm sure that's not a big deal. With no binoculars, the lookouts had to rely on eyesight alone. And that wouldn't be so terrible if it weren't for the fact that the night was extremely dark, cold, and calm, making it very hard to see icebergs. Luckily, there were almost none all night. Almost. Both lookouts miraculously survived the sinking and, when interviewed, agreed that if they had binoculars, they could have seen the iceberg and reacted more quickly, avoiding the unnecessary loss of over 1,500 lives, but dooming James Cameron's film career. The key, donated to the British Sailor Society by Officer Blair's daughter, was eventually sold at auction for 90,000 British pounds. If you've ever dealt with the trouble of remembering how many tablespoons are in a gallon, or that there's 660 feet in a furlong, you probably long for the ease of the metric system. Being an American myself, I'm genetically inclined to detest the anti-freedom units, but getting an engineering degree made me appreciate the simplicity of the metric system. I mean, guys, it's really great. Everything is just a multiplicative of 10. Kilogram, it's 1,000 grams. A meter, it's 100 centimeters. Like, wow, amazing. Anyway, that convenience was stolen from us by a band of scallywag pirates during America's infancy. In 1793, Secretary of State Thomas Mother Effin Jefferson recognized that the United States needed to standardize their units of measure as multiple systems were being used, making commercial trading a logistical nightmare. Luckily, the French of all people had an answer. Scientist Joseph Dombey was dispatched to the United States with a special gift: a carefully crafted copper cylinder which would serve as the revolutionary new standard in weight measurement: the kilogram. Just one component of France's newly developing metric system. While sailing to the States with his cylinder in one hand and the kilogram in the other, Dombey's ship was blown off course by a storm. Now headed for the 1700s Caribbean. British pirates at the time usually attacked non-British ships to impede their trade, and unfortunately Dombey was one of those victims. He was held hostage for ransom but died in captivity. Dombey's death meant that Jefferson never got the metric standard, meaning it was never adopted. So the United States stuck with the English units as their standard. While it is possible that we could all be measuring our all-beef francs using centimeters, it's doubtful, as multiple attempts over the years to implement the metric system have been defeated at the greasy hand of American pride. Ethiopia and Italy typically aren't two countries that you would hear about in the same sentence. But during the late 1800s, when Africa was getting absolutely reamed by colonization, Italy had its sights set on some potential land expansion candidates. One of them being, you guessed it, Eritrea, Ethiopia's northern neighbor. This led to a bit of an unofficial scuffle called the Italo-Ethiopian War of 1887, which lasted for 2 years and ended with Italy formally occupying Eritrea and the signing of the Treaty of Wuchal. Among other rules, the treaty basically stated that peace was to remain between Italy and Ethiopia. However, one article had two different meanings between languages. In Italian, the article stated that Ethiopia must act through Italy if they wish to do business with other governments. The Amharic or Ethiopian version stated that Ethiopia can act through Italy for external business, which suggested that it wasn't mandatory. Very different things. The treaty was nonetheless signed and eventually the two countries clashed again. Italy claimed that it had full control over Ethiopia's external affairs, but Ethiopia claimed, "Nuh-uh, dude." Italy then invaded Ethiopia in 1895, starting the official First Italo-Ethiopian War. With Italy's army of 44,000 against Ethiopia's 125,000, the Italians ended up getting their spaghetti-eating teeth kicked in, securing Ethiopia's independence in 1896. Until Italy invaded again in 1935. Italy won that time. All in all, around 25,000 lives were lost during the First Italo-Ethiopian War, all because Italy decided to skip its daily Duolingo sessions. When you're a power-hungry dictator to millions of food-hungry citizens, your people will probably hate you, which is something that Joseph Stalin was shocked to find out when leading the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death in 1953. Although he came into power with some strong initial support, it quickly dried up as his first few years sucked eggs. He went balls deep into national industrialization and uprooted the agricultural system. No food means famine, and famine means people die. So, people died. Millions of them. Stalin was now officially an asshole, and assholes need to be wiped clean. His political rivals demanded his removal, prompting Stalin to switch to defense mode. In doing so, he began stringent investigations of the government for anyone who might even toy with the idea of questioning his policies. Yes, hello, I have question. No one was safe. During what came to be known as the Great Purge between 1936 and 1938, Stalin expanded his investigations to anyone he deemed a threat to the Soviet Union. By the end, there were over 700,000 documented executions of workers, artists, teachers, whoever, while in reality it is estimated to be about 1.2 million. Even his own Red Army saw 37,000 soldiers executed or sentenced to labor camps. And these weren't just lowly foot soldiers either, I'm talking like commanders and generals, his top guys. Stalin was absolutely unhinged, with his paranoia destroying his mental and physical health. He ended up surviving a severe heart attack and a stroke in 1945, with his health never fully recovering. On the night of February 28, 1953, Stalin was chilling with some bros, watching movies and having dinner. After a long night of joking and smooches, Stalin retired to his private quarters, specifically instructing not to be disturbed until he woke up the next morning. Well, the next morning came and nothing. Afternoon, nothing. Remember that even his closest friends were terrified of defying him lest they be sent to the gulag. Night came. Still nothing. And by now, they're pretty worried. It wasn't until 11 p.m. that a housekeeper dared to check on Stalin. He was found on the ground unconscious and unresponsive. Still terrified to call the doctor, it took another 8 hours for Stalin to receive medical attention. With an extremely high blood pressure of 190/110, Stalin had suffered another intense stroke. He received around-the-clock care for 3 days before he ultimately despawned on March 5th, 1953. Had he been kinder to his bros and not such a complete butthole, he may have been treated sooner and survived his ailment, even if it was short-lived. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed in 1991. And there we have it. You can clearly see how small itty-bitty mistakes can lead to some severe consequences. So be sure to never make another mistake in your life.
Something bad about every US state, in no particular order. Hawaii is our most recent state added to the Big 50 in 1959. The US government had their eyeballs all over the little group of islands as a strategic military outpost in the 1800s. Not to mention the sugarcane plantations. Freedom forbid any smelly European or Asian countries get their grubby paws on it, so with that in mind, as well as wanting to circumvent any potential sugar tariffs, a couple of US businessmen with a couple of US Marines pointed a couple of their US guns at Hawaiian King Kalakaua in 1887, forcing him to sign over power to the United States. But after the king kame'd his last hame, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, tried to regain power, but the US was all, ha! So one cuckoo kachu later, and the Republic of Hawaii was established in 1894, led by one Sanford Dole, whose cousin would go on to form the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which would later become the Dole Food Company. If you've never had it, Dole Whip is freaking amazing. Highly recommend it. Ground zero for the 1918 influenza pandemic, the deadliest pandemic of the modern world, is widely believed to have been Camp Funston in Manhattan, Kansas. The camp itself was an army base training infantry in the closing months of World War I. Well, with failure to quarantine sick troops, the flu was definitely not just in Kansas anymore. Sickly soldiers were sent overseas where they oversneezed in Europe, spreading the flu worldwide. By the end of the pandemic around 1921, roughly 500 million people around the globe had been infected, with death toll estimates ranging from 50 to 100 million poor souls. July 16, 1945 saw the detonation of the world's first nuclear weapon at the Trinity Nuclear Testing Site in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. The successful detonation was the catalyst for the construction of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan towards the end of World War II. It's just a shame that thousands of New Mexico locals were never warned about the testing because they caught some heavy radiation dosages. Between the years of 1948 and 1975, the Aberdeen Proving Ground facility in Aberdeen, Maryland, hosted a wealth of unethical human experiments on US Army soldiers. About 7,000 soldiers were experimented on, all without informed consent, meaning that they had no idea what they were getting into. The men were exposed to over 250 different chemical weapons, including mustard gas, deadly nerve agents, and psychoactive substances for the sake of researching effects, preventative measures, and medical treatments. Despite the lethality of some of these substances, dosages were low enough where no deaths were reported. These are getting dark really quick. So here's a silly one. The Aroostook War of 1838 was a bloodless armed standoff between American and British Canadian lumberjacks. While they slept all night and worked all day, there was a disagreement about where the US-Canadian border actually was. So both sides, eager to chop into the Aroostook River Valley's supple, sappy trees, got into a bit of a kerfuffle. Troops were deployed, but no shots were fired and no lives were lost. Instead, everyone skipped and jumped home to cut down trees on their respective sides. The 1974 super outbreak was one of the most intense tornado outbreaks in recorded history, with 147 separate tornadoes formed in a 25-hour period across 13 states, with Indiana being hit the hardest. 47 fatalities, 1,000 injuries, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damages were reported. That blows. Just slightly west of Virginia is West Virginia, home to the worst mining disaster in the history of the United States, so far. On December 6, 1907, the Fairmont Coal Company's number 6 and number 8 mine shafts in the town of Monongah went kablooey. 2 separate methane explosions instantly killed hundreds of workers in the mines and trapped any of those fortunate enough to survive, but their luck quickly ran out. The combined blast collapsed most of the existing cave structure and the ventilation shaft, blocking off fresh air and building up toxic gases which suffocated the trapped miners. The lack of any safety standards or respiratory safety equipment made rescue attempts hopeless. Only 5 men managed to be saved, with 362 lives lost. The tragedy sparked public outcry for stricter safety standards, and in 1910, the US government established the Bureau of Mines with the goal of reducing mining accidents, though it had been a few decades before any safety standards would be enforced. Bet you don't yearn for the mines anymore, do you? In 1879, members of the Osage Native tribe struck oil on their reservation. The US government did what it does and quickly swooped in to establish oil production and paid out royalties to the members of the Osage tribe, catapulting them to astronomical levels of wealth. And that's when the mysterious deaths started. You see, Congress, not believing that the natives were capable of managing their wealth by themselves, appointed American businessmen and lawyers to look after their finances as legal guardians. Well, throughout the 1920s, some of these guardians began the systematic murder of 60 Osage natives in order to inherit their wealth.
Formal investigations were launched, becoming one of the first major investigations conducted by the FBI. If you want to read more about this, I highly recommend the book Killers of the Flower Moon. There was also a film adaptation done recently, but it apparently wasn't as good. Louisiana. In the early 1900s, there was a plethora of invasive water hyacinths just gunking up the local rivers. Not to mention a pervasive meat shortage. So in order to feed two birds with one stone, the American Hippo Bill was proposed to Congress. The bill would import African hippos to munch on the plants, only for said hippos to be subsequently munched on by Americans. Other animals were on the list, including Manchurian pigs, African buffalo, Tibetan yaks, rhinos, and of course, dicks. Sadly, the bill never passed, thwarting American plans to deep throat delicious and nutritious dick meat. A series of massive earthquakes completely rocked southeast Missouri in 1811. One 8.0 magnitude earthquake was so severe that it caused sections of the Mississippi River to flow backwards and several parts of the surrounding landscape to go all bleh. Some people died, probably. On April 12, 1861, those gosh dang Confederates bombarded Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina for 34 hours straight and 0 hours gay, marking the start of the United States Civil War, which would go on to claim the lives of nearly 700,000 people. The worst massacre in US history involving a school dates all the way back to 1927 in the small town of Bath, Michigan. Local disgruntled douche Andrew Kehoe used dynamite to destroy the Bath Consolidated School, an expensive upgrade to the local school district. The construction and maintenance of the school caused local property taxes to shoot up to account for operating costs. Kehoe, who was already on edge from his failing farming and political careers, as well as a terminally ill wife, had hit a breaking point with the steeper tax burden. Over the course of several months, Kehoe had managed to purchase multiple crates of dynamite, something typically used in farming at the time for stump and boulder removal, and hid them throughout the school. On the morning of May 18, 1927, the dynamite was detonated, killing 38 in the process and injuring dozens more. While the chaos ensued, Kehoe had murdered his wife, destroyed his own farm, and drove to the school with his truck packed with more dynamite. He parked his car in front of the school and detonated the truck, taking himself and a few bystanders out with him. Luckily though, a second hoard of dynamite within the school failed to detonate, preventing further loss of life. This single tragedy had claimed a quarter of the town's children. California, the United States' sweaty ass crack, boasts the largest economy in the country, which is perfect, because that's what they need to constantly fund relief efforts for the thousands of wildfires each year burning millions of acres. In 2020 alone, California saw over 9,600 wildfires with almost 4.4 million acres reduced to char. Do better. Get wetter. Extremely heavy and frequent rainfall in 1926 through 1927 culminated in the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927. The big ol' river traveled across the land, flooding far and wide through several states including Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and of course, Mississippi. Around 500 souls were washed away and several hundred thousands of people were displaced from their homes, resulting in upwards of $10 billion in damages. The U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 in Minnesota resulted in the largest public execution in United States history. The people of the Dakota Native American tribe were pretty darn pissed as incoming settlers sought to manifest their destiny across the Midwest. After constant displacement and being on the brink of starvation due to poor farming and hunting conditions, the Dakota had just about enough. A small group of Dakota men had attacked and killed 5 settlers, including a man, his wife, and their teenage daughter. This escalated into a small uprising which was stomped out by the US Volunteer Army over the course of about a month and a half. Over 350 US civilians were massacred, with 150 Dakota natives killed in the clash. After all was said and done, 400 Dakota men faced trial, with 303 sentenced to death, though President Lincoln did reduce this down to just 38 men sentenced for execution. These men received their short drop and a sudden stop in front of a public crowd on December 26, 1862. Since 2007, over 20 detached and decayed human feet have been washed ashore along the coast of the Salish Sea in northeastern Washington. The feet have been found in various shoes, supposedly protected from additional predation from scavengers. Several of the feet have been identified as remains of missing people or those suspected of ending their own life within the area. Pretty sad, but hey,
free shoes.
In perhaps the worst lapse of judgment in the history of mankind, the city of Cleveland, Ohio organized Balloon Fest in 1986. The goal of the event was to break a world record of most balloons released simultaneously, but I guess no one realized that balloons don't rise in perpetuity. Shortly after the release of over 1.5 million inflatables, a storm system promptly blew the elastic spheres back to Earth, blanketing the city and polluting Lake Erie. Airplanes were grounded, fishermen went missing, waterways became clogged, and many lawsuits were issued. All in all, the cleanup cost the city of Cleveland over $5 million. The people of Oregon really hate it when you pronounce it as Oregon, so I've experienced. But anyway, a few months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a single Japanese pilot flew a secret mission to bomb the forests of Oregon in an attempt to divert war supplies. Incendiary bombs were dropped in the forests of Brookings, but in terms of damage, they didn't do jack shit.
Thanks.
After the war, the Japanese pilot, Nobuo Fujita, was invited back to Brookings as a guest of honor in order to make amends, which he hesitantly accepted. As a formal apology for his actions, Fujita presented the city his family heirloom katana, one passed down across 400 years, which is still on display in the Chetco Public Library to this day. Timothy Treadwell was a huge fan of wild grizzly bears. Keyword being was. He spent about 13 summers living amongst them in Alaska. Returning one final time towards the end of autumn, the bears then became a huge fan of Timothy. One giant grizzly had attacked Timothy and his girlfriend, mauling and eating the couple. The bear was later shot and killed, with an autopsy confirming human remains in its stomach. Fellas, don't befriend giant wild animals. I don't care how cute their ears are. They're wild animals. They will murder you. North Carolina almost became No Carolina in 1961 after a B-52 bomber carrying a payload of 2 nuclear bombs headed towards the Canadian Arctic experienced a catastrophic failure and broke up mid-air shortly after takeoff. The destroyed aircraft unintentionally dropped the bombs back down to Earth, with one falling from the plane as if properly deployed, initiating a sequence of safety switches for detonation. However, one final safety switch failed to actuate, saving North Carolina and a few surrounding states from becoming nothing more than a big black smudge on the globe. The other bomb slammed into the Earth, but very luckily remained intact and relatively undamaged. Both bombs were rated as 3.8 megaton bombs, about 250 times more powerful than those dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. So yeah, the US almost accidentally nuked itself into oblivion. During the events of World War II, tens of thousands of Japanese Americans were relocated to several internment camps across the country out of fear of domestic attacks. One such camp was the Heart Mountain Camp in Park County, Wyoming, which housed 14,000 Japanese Americans during its 3 years of operation between 1942 and 1945. The camp boasted many activities, a poorly supplied school for children, a hospital, and many sports and social clubs, but, they were still forced to be there and heavily monitored. Way back before the US was even established, the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia was formed in 1607. Just a few years later, settlers experienced what is known as the starving time. The combined effects of the brutal winter of 1609, food shortages, devastating disease, and constant Native American attacks really screwed over colonists who resorted to pure desperation for survival. The colonists ate dogs, rats, their own shoes, and each other in order to survive. 300 settlers saw the beginning of winter, but only 60 saw the beginning of spring. The state of Rhode Island saw around 1,000 slaving voyages between the 18th and 19th century, bringing in an estimated 100,000 slaves to the Americas. The year 1919 saw the occurrence of the Elaine Massacre in Hoopsburg, Arkansas. About 100 African American sharecroppers demanded fairer pricing for their cotton crops as they were frequently underpaid for their labors. During a meeting, which was protected by armed guards, 2 white men rolled up to find out what all the hullabaloo was about. After a brief struggle, some shots were fired, though it's unknown who shot first. One of the men died, the other injured. Well, word got out about the event being a supposed uprising being planned by the black community. In response, several locals and hundreds of US troops were deployed to put an end to the so-called rebellion, resulting in the cold-blooded murder of over 200 African Americans in the area. In 1903, residents of Van Meter, Iowa reported sightings of a strange bat-like humanoid figure for several nights. Dubbed the Van Meter Visitor, the bat-human-dinosaur hybrid monster thing possessed big ol' flappy wings, sharp claws, and an eerily glowing horn on its melon. Many credible witnesses attest to the sightings, and locals, in true American fashion, shot at the creature in an attempt to kill it. It supposedly escaped into a nearby abandoned mine and was never seen again. In the early 1800s, Colonel William H. Jackson once gifted his favorite oak tree its own deed, legally entitling it to its own ownership and all land within an 8-foot radius of itself. The original tree, located in Athens, Georgia, fell in 1942, but not before an acorn sprouted a new sapling, which legally inherited the land. Why is this bad? That's because there's a chance that this tree owns more land than you do. The Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah look like something out of a dream sequence. Back in the 1920s, with the evolving technology of automobiles, adrenaline junkies would often challenge each other to travel across the flats as fast as possible. Of course, this inevitably led to numerous crashes, breakdowns, and deaths, a tradition that persists to this day. The Silk Strike of 1913 in Paterson, New Jersey was the organized strike of over 25,000 silk workers with the goal of establishing an 8-hour workday and better working conditions. Over the course of the strike's 5-month duration, 300 silk mills had shut down with no workforce, and over 1,800 strikers were arrested for inciting violence. Ultimately, the strike was defeated as influence failed to spread beyond Paterson and no demands were ever met. Speaking of terrible working conditions, the Radium Girls of Ottawa, Illinois were tasked with hand-painting watches with self-luminous paint made from radioactive powdered radium. The women would often point their brushes with their lips to produce finer tips, but their lips inadvertently sipped the radioactive drips, and if one dared to skip the lip tip grip, their managers would flip, so tips remained dipped and their lips remained zipped. Company owners expressed the safety of the material, but actively avoided it themselves. The ingestion of the radium, unsurprisingly, caused multiple women to contract radiation poisoning. Between the years of 1917 and 1927, over 50 women had died from acute radiation syndrome. This sparked public outrage and reforms in labor rights. Radium continued to be used in the production of watch dials up to the 1970s. Multiple residents outside of Exeter, New Hampshire all reported seeing the same strange light pattern in the sky across several evenings in 1965. The large object reportedly moved silently across the night sky, emitting eerie red lights in a specific pattern. The event terrified locals in the area for years, though skeptics have debunked this event as simply a mid-air refueling drill performed by the United States Air Force. Specifically, KC-97 tankers flashed red lights in the same exact pattern that was described by eyewitnesses. The city of Wilmington, Delaware experienced a catastrophic outbreak of cholera and typhoid fever in the late 1800s thanks to rapid industrialization shitifying up the local water sources. With hundreds sick and dozens dying, the city had to drastically overhaul the local sewer system, including installing a water purification plant in the early 1900s. But at least you can breathe a fresh sigh of relief nowadays. This is a devil's hole pupfish, a critically endangered and supremely cute species of fish found only in the Devil's Hole in the Death Valley National Park in Nevada. Or Nevada for the locals. The fish were first discovered back in the 1940s and were almost immediately attempted to be protected. In 1967, they were officially listed as endangered thanks to local drilling by development companies, which reduced water levels within the cave system. Despite aggressive conservation efforts, there were only 38 of the little guys in existence as of spring 2025, making them one of the most critically endangered species on Earth. The Great Jacksonville Fire of 1901 completely reshaped the city of Jacksonville, Florida. After a rogue kitchen fire broke out, the flames quickly spread to a nearby mattress factory. After more than 8 hours, the inferno finally came under control after completely engulfing the majority of the city, destroying almost 2,400 buildings in the process, rendering 10,000 people homeless and 7 people dead. Now that's what I call a fire sale. Farmers in the late 1960s and early 1970s were pretty pissed to find their precious moo cows slaughtered and mutilated beyond natural means. Investigations clocked in over 8,000 separate mutilations over the years. Some of the bulbous bovines were found to have sedatives in their systems, while others were secretly marked with fluorescent paint. Unidentified aircraft in the area were spotted, suggesting government interventions or possible secret weapons testing, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. 19th century Philadelphia, Pennsylvania saw the rise of several teeth thieves who would go around robbing graves of entire bodies. The corpses would be sold to nearby medical schools for anatomical study, while the teeth were extracted and sold to companies who made dentures. Remember to smile. Kentucky is home to the McCoy family, one half of the infamous Hatfield-McCoy family feud. Initial squabbles began in the 1870s over the Civil War, with the Hatfields being Confederate sympathizers and the McCoys being pro-Union. Across 30 years, multiple lawsuits, thefts, and even murders escalated the feud, with over a dozen family members killed. The feud finally came to an end in the late 1890s. Or did it? About 100 years after the start of it all, descendants of the families came together to duke it out on the game show Family Feud in 1979, with the McCoys coming out on top. Nowadays, the family homes are tourist attractions, holding annual festivals with activities like tug-of-war and sight tours to commemorate the decades-long dispute. Just north of South Dakota is North Dakota, and boy did it suffer a harsh winter in 1936. Record low temperatures plummeted all the way down to negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's negative 51°C for you foreigners. The frigid forecast froze farm fauna fleeing for favorable feverishness. Entire towns burned through their coal supplies, leaving families to die in their homes from exposure. In 1847, nearly 200 Dutch immigrants made their way over from the Netherlands to Wisconsin in search of a better life, but a similar cold climate. After months of crossing the Atlantic and scooting in through to the Great Lakes, the freaky-deaky Dutch were just about to set foot in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, when a poorly maintained boiler overheated, causing a fire to erupt on board the very wooden ship. Unfortunately, the ship only had 2 lifeboats, capable of holding about 20 people each. Of the few hundred people aboard, only 45 managed to escape on the lifeboats. The Phoenix, ironically, went down in a blaze, never to rise from the ashes, because they were washed away. Mysterious deaths surrounding the Ray family had caused concern for the townsfolk of Jewett City, Connecticut. The supposedly healthy family members were stricken down left and right from an undetectable killer. The boys of the family became paler by the day and were seen coughing up blood until ultimately passing away within the coming days. The reasonable cause of death, the townsfolk thought, was vampires. In order to stop the undead from rising and killing others, the recently deceased were exhumed from their graves and burned. The real culprit? Tuberculosis. Conveniently enough, though, the burning of the corpses probably did prevent the contagious disease from spreading any further. Go figure. In 1855, the US government approved the import of several camels to serve as pack animals through the arid landscape of the Southwest, formally establishing the United States Camel Corps. But then the Civil War broke out a few years later in 1861, and the camels were either sold off or completely abandoned in the desert, supposedly being spotted over the next several decades. Roam free, fellas. Boston, Massachusetts is home to the deadliest nightclub fire in US history. The Coconut Grove fire burned itself into people's memories in 1942 with a wealth of poor safety choices leading to the brutal blaze. Exit doors were chained up to prevent unauthorized access, air conditioners were filled with flammable refrigerants, and everyone was packed in like sardines. Not to mention the fact that all of the lavish interior decor could catch fire faster than a witch in Salem. In all, 492 people ended up dying in the inferno. The club owner, Barney Walensky, who was very much aware of his club's safety code violations, was convicted on just 19 counts of manslaughter and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison, though he was pardoned after just 4. He ended up dying a few weeks after release from cancer. Now, when you're chilling in class, the last thing you want to experience is a big old gas explosion. But unfortunately, the students in the New London School in New London, Texas, were about to do just that. Alright class, who could tell me what happens when you hook a big chunk of magnesium into some water? Yep, Ron. That's an easy one. It just, after recently canceling their natural gas supply contract to save a few buckaroos, the school board decided to instead tap into a local gasoline waste line to supplement the demand. The shitty and shoddy plumbing work caused natural gas leaks throughout the school's basement crawl spaces. Now keep in mind that natural gas is colorless and odorless, so no one was really aware of any leaks. except for the students who complained of headaches, though they were ignored by the staff.
You get out of here, go on, get.
The creeping gas cloud was inadvertently ignited on March 18, 1937, causing an instantaneous explosion that killed 295 out of roughly 500 students and staff present in the building. The disaster led to a reform of requiring odorous additives to be added to natural gas supplies for better detection of leaks. If you're looking for a breath of fresh air, New York City is probably not the best place to do so, especially in 1966. The Great New York City smog blanketed the Big Apple in a giant fart cloud of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and smoke. The dense haze persisted for 3 days across the 1966 Thanksgiving weekend. A public health study estimated that about 10% of the city's population suffered some adverse health effects from sucking in the smelly smog. In the end, 168 New Yorkers ended up biting the dust, prompting President Lyndon B. Johnson and several members of Congress to produce the 1967 Air Quality Act and amendments to the 1970 Clean Air Act, which heavily reduced air pollution down to more manageable levels of toxicity. In the wake of the US Civil War, the South was really hurting for some cheap labor as all of their slaves were just freed thanks to the 13th Amendment. The best alternative? Prisoners. Convicts were extremely cheap compared to full-time employees, so in the early 1890s, Coal Creek mine owners decided to lay off their workforce and instead conscripted convicted criminals to work the mines for pennies on the dollar. But instead of milling around, the recently sacked and salty miners decided to pick a fight, sparking the Coal Creek War of 1891. The manic miners attacked a load of state prisons and mining properties, ensuring their efforts would not be in vain. The National Guard was called in, arresting over 500 workers. The scuffle did result in Tennessee ending their convict leasing program in 1896, so that's a win. Sweet Home Alabama is home to Yellow Mama, an electric chair built in 1927 by master carpenter and inmate Ed Mason. 152 criminals have gotten the sweet, stinging embrace of Yellow Mama's arms, with her final zap being performed in 2002. Since then, death row inmates were given the legal right to choose their demise, either lethal injection or the chair, and to no surprise, they opt for the less painful option. As such, Yellow Mama remains locked away in the attic of the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, patiently waiting for her next victim. Imagine your life as a beaver, munching away on a tree or building a dam, when all of a sudden you get yoinked away from your beaver family, put in a tiny box, flown up to the sky, and hucked out of an airplane to be parachuted down miles away from home. That's exactly what the Idaho Department of Fish and Game did in 1948 after locals complained of excessive property damage. 76 beavers were relocated from northwest Idaho to central Idaho via airdrop using leftover World War II parachutes. One beaver died. Very sad. A big-ass swarm of locusts tore across the Midwest in 1874, devastating any and all vegetation, food, clothes, and farming equipment for days on end, with Nebraska taking most of the damage. Water sources were contaminated and livestock were consumed. High estimates place the swarm size at upwards of 12.5 trillion locusts. I mean, there were quite literally a blanket of locusts a foot high off the ground. The swarm, spanning across 2 million square miles, reportedly blocked out the sun for multiple hours during their flight. By the time the locust plague had passed, the Midwest had sustained over $200 million in crop damages. Bennington Triangle, located across southwestern Vermont, saw several people disappear under mysterious circumstances between 1945 and 1950. The most well-known case being the disappearance of 18-year-old student Paula Jean Weldon, who up and vanished in 1946 and was never seen again. The young girl had reportedly left her college campus in the afternoon and proceeded to walk 6 miles to a nearby trail before going missing. Lack of substantial police investigation, evidence, or witnesses left the case cold. The poorly run investigation had prompted the Vermont legislature to create the Vermont State Police just 7 months after Paula Jean's disappearance. Hundreds of Lakota Sioux natives were gunned down during the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 after natives began expressing frustration and anger over continued forced relocation and broken promises from the US government. You suck! A new religious movement called the Ghost Dance, a literal dance performed in hopes of ridding the land of white settlers, was seen as a potential act of rebellion.
That's scary, I don't like that.
As a precaution, natives were rounded up and disarmed by the US Army. A misunderstanding surrounding an accidental misfire of a rifle started the massacre, which saw the murder of about 300 native men, women, and children. Continuing that pattern, Montana had itself one of the worst Native American massacres in US history. The Richest massacre involved the cold-blooded murder of over 200 Piegan Blackfeet Native Americans, all gunned down by the United States Army near the Richest River in Montana. The whole conflict escalated from years of back-and-forth petty skirmishes, white settlers encroaching on native lands and Blackfeet natives raiding these new settlements. But all came to a climax on the morning of January 23, 1870, where a large force of US cavalrymen gunned down over 200 Blackfoot natives. Since most of the men were out hunting at the time, the majority of the victims were elders, women, and children.
Spooky history stories. If you're well versed in American history, then you know the story of formerly alive President Abraham Lincoln's big night out on the town in 1865. Even if you're familiar with the historical artwork around the matter, you might ask yourself, who the heck are these other people? You know Lincoln, sure, and of course the guy using Lincoln's skull as target practice is John Wilkes Booth. But also accompanying the president that night were his wife, Mary, close friend and Union Army Major Henry R. Rathbone, and his fiancée, Clara Harris. Lincoln and the gang were out celebrating the recent Union victory of the American Civil War and were seated in a private viewing box to the right of the stage in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. What do you think of the play, dear? Just then, Confederate sore loser John Wilkes Booth entered the booth and took aim, blasting the president point blank in the head with a .44 caliber lead ball from his single-shot Derringer pistol. At the sound of the gunshot, Rathbone spun around to see Lincoln collapse in his chair with Booth standing in a cloud of smoke. He immediately leapt from his seat and charged the assassin, but Booth came well prepared. In the struggle, Booth was able to equip a dagger and severely slash Rathbone's arm before leaping from the box onto the stage. Right before jumping, Rathbone was able to grab Booth's coat, causing Booth to lose his balance and eat shit, fudging up his leg in the process. Despite being in a packed theater of witnesses and bystanders, Booth evaded capture for 12 days. However, his plan was successful as President Lincoln died from his injuries just 9 hours after the fatal game of tag. Rathbone, who passed out due to blood loss but eventually recovered from his injuries, personally placed the weight of the president's death on his shoulders. He believed he should have been able to prevent the assassination, and because of this, he bore immeasurable guilt every day of his life, absolutely destroying his mental well-being to the point of insanity. After resigning from the military 5 years later, he struggled to find work until eventually given a consul position in Germany by President Arthur. Rathbone's now wife Clara had hoped that the change of scenery would do him some good. Rathbone's mental health continued to spiral, resulting in him lashing out at his young children and violently threatening Clara. After 13 years of mental deterioration, the breaking point had finally been reached. On December 23, 1883, Rathbone attacked his children in a fit of madness in their home. Clara had rushed to protect her children, but was fatally shot and stabbed by her husband. Instead of continuing his onslaught, he turned the knife on himself, stabbing himself in the chest 5 times. Despite the failed seppuku attempt, Rathbone survived his wounds, with police finding him covered in blood, claiming that there were people hidden in the walls of his home whispering to him. He was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. During trial, he was officially declared insane by court doctors and committed to an asylum where he died 28 years later. Henry Howard Holmes was an American con artist and the US's first documented serial killer. Born the lesser-cool-named Herman Mudgett, Holmes attended the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery in 1882, where he allegedly would accompany his professor in various grave-robbing activities as a way to supply the school with fresh bodies for examination and dissection. It was here that Holmes developed a slight obsession with death, and seldom does such an obsession lead to good things. After graduating medical school in 1884 and being upgraded to Dr. H.H. Holmes, he moved out to Chicago to work in a drugstore, which he eventually bought outright from the owner.
What is drugs?
Proceeds from that store helped to fund his newfound hobby that would soon evolve into something much more sinister. Holmes drew up plans for a hotel, one designed to be a death trap for all who entered.
Not the best business model for return customers, but hey. Several contractors and architects were put on the job with a steady rotation of firing and hiring. Now, it's believed that this constant turnover kept everyone from knowing his true design intentions, with no one designer knowing the full scale of the operation at any given time. When it was fully built, the hotel had 3 floors, with the first one being mainly retail and including a new drugstore. Holmes used the hotel to accommodate travelers during the upcoming Chicago World's Fair in 1893, which attracted millions of people to the area. Now, according to legend, the hotel contained secret rooms, trick hallways, and trapdoors and torture chambers throughout. It was in this hotel that Holmes would allegedly trap and torture his victims, eventually selling their bodies to the local medical school as a way to satisfy his macabre desires while still making bank. During the World's Fair, Holmes would charisma check dozens of wealthy women to spend the night in the hotel for rest and relaxation, but they would never be seen again. It is believed that as many as 50 women went missing during the World's Fair, all linked to what Holmes would later call his murder castle. In August of the same year, the 3rd floor of the hotel caught fire. While no one was injured, the fire destroyed most of the 3rd floor, but Holmes had an ace up his sleeve: multiple insurance policies. But, like insurance companies do, they refused to pay out and accused Holmes of setting the fire himself and engaging in insurance fraud. Holmes, obviously angered by such accusations, quickly skedaddled out of Chicago. And over the following years, he continued to dabble in insurance fraud with his friend Benjamin Pitezel. For his next trick, Holmes had suffocated Pitezel with chloroform and burned his unconscious body for a life insurance payout. What's even worse is that through extreme coercion and manipulation, Holmes had convinced Pitezel's widowed wife to place 3 of her 5 children into his custody. And over the years, he would murder all 3. Holmes had forced the 2 older children, 13-year-old Alice and 9-year-old Nellie, into a trunk, drilled a hole through it, and plugged it with a gas line, suffocating them. He then buried their bodies in a cellar in his house. As for the 3rd child, 7-year-old Howard, Holmes drugged the boy, dismembered, and burned his body, with only some teeth and bones being the identifying factors. Eventually, the children's remains were discovered, leading to Holmes' arrest and subsequent conviction of the Pitezel murders. He was sentenced to death and hanged in 1896, but not before confessing to over 200 murders thanks to his murder castle. But Holmes was regarded as a habitual liar, and experts believe that there was only enough evidence to link him to 9 murders. Still a high count, but not nearly the 200 that Holmes had claimed. As for the murder castle, it is confirmed that the stories about the design and the use of the building were widely sensationalized and over-exaggerated by local media. Sucks from a horror standpoint, but still makes a good story nonetheless, right? Take a look at this face. Seem familiar at all? If not, then you're useless to me if I start joking. Anyway, this is a death mask, a plaster casting of the face of an unidentified woman who was pulled from the River Seine in Paris in the late 1880s. She became known as L'Inconnue de la Seine, or the unknown woman of the Seine. After being fished out of the French River, her body was placed in the Paris morgue, which, at the time, put nameless corpses on full display for the sake of identification by the general public who happened to be passing by. Oh hey kids, look, it's Grandma! Oh. Because of this strange but effective method, the morgue became a popular tourist and public gathering spot, often referred to as the only free theater in Paris. This particular woman, however, was a bit of an oddity. Medical examination showed no visible wounds or signs of a struggle, so it was concluded that her death was self-inflicted, with her age being estimated at just 16 years old. But it was her calm, serene expression that caught the attention of a pathologist of the morgue. Since he couldn't take a picture to make it last longer, he decided to instead cast a plaster death mask of her face as a way to immortalize her. Creepily enough, but also to no surprise, many Parisians thought that having a face of a dead woman in their house to be the coolest thing since sliced baguette. Sacre bleu! So countless copies of the death mask were made. From an artistic standpoint, many interpretations claim that the young woman's demeanor expresses a calm control over death, being accepting of its inevitability rather than fear. From a non-artistic viewpoint, you have some dead girl's face hanging on your wall. Over the years, her face had inspired several literary works, pieces of art, and even fashion. But where have you seen her face before? Well, believe it or not, chances are you've actually unknowingly given her mouth to mouth. Because hers is the face of the CPR training doll, which is used in almost all CPR training courses worldwide since 1960. Sure, that might be creepy, but at least it's thematically appropriate. World War I was absolutely brutal. It was the forefront of many new innovations in warfare like tanks, heavy machine guns, and manned aircraft. All effective technologies developed for the sake of boosting your own kill count. But another, more sinister tactic was soon deployed onto the battlefield: chemical weapons. Perhaps the most widely used was mustard gas, but others were used too. For instance, chlorine gas, a yellow-green gas which sure enough looks like a stereotypical funny fart cloud, but packs a lethal punch. This story begins in September of 1914, where German soldiers were tasked with taking the Russian-occupied Auschwitz fortress. It was constructed as a Russian Empire border defensive structure against German attack, and boy was it good at its job. German Empire units had repeatedly tried to penetrate the fortress, but were told no through heavy retaliatory gunfire and artillery. Despite facing multiple defeats, stubborn German soldiers refused to give up so easily. 3 assaults were conducted on the fortress over the course of a year. The first saw German infantry losses of about 6,000, while Russian forces only suffered 139. The second assault saw a continued bombardment on the fortress by German artillery, but the Russian soldiers didn't budge. This caused several month-long standoffs, which eventually resulted in German retreat. However, the third assault was to be the one to huff and puff and blow the fortress down. Returning to the fortress in August of 1915, the German forces now had fresh soldiers, even heavier artillery, and multiple canisters of chlorine gas. On the defensive side, the Russian line was only 900 strong, but they still took their chances against the impossible odds. After waiting several hours for favorable wind conditions, German soldiers bombarded the fortress with the deadly gas to flush out the enemy. The Russian soldiers, unfortunately, had no suitable protection against the gas and had to improvise, covering their faces with the best thing that they could come up with: rags soaked in piss. To no surprise, this proved ineffective. The soldiers were severely incapacitated by the gas, and now they smelled like piss. As a quick science lesson, when chlorine gas is inhaled, it reacts with the residual moisture in your body, forming hydrochloric acid, which starts to corrode your internal organs. In short, it causes big ouchies on the inside. With this mechanism of action being well known, the Germans were certain of their victory and began to infiltrate the fortress, but were met with a horrific sight. Despite suffering in complete agony, covered in blisters and coughing up lungs and blood, the Russian soldiers still stood their ground and continued fighting. The German troops, of course, scheißed their Hosen at the sight of the seemingly undead Russians and fled from the fortress in a complete panic, with some even stumbling into barbed wire in the process. The rest of the German troops immediately hightailed it out of there. Although successful, most of the Russian defense died from the gas. Those who did survive barely got by the skin of their whatever they had left. Sadly, Russian troops preemptively demolished most of the fortress as Germans began closing in for a 4th time later that month. Just as a quick warning, I'm going to be showing some graphic medical photos of real syphilis patients, so if you don't want to see that, click away now. There you go. Usually when you hear the phrase Italian Renaissance, you think of high-class society, revolutionary innovation, and lots of statues of dudes with their dicks out. Well, allow me to throw a wrench in that perception by introducing you to the concept of syphilis zombies. Syphilis? Like the guy with the boulder? No, silly. Syphilis. Like the STD. Quick backstory. In 1494, the King of Naples, Ferdinand I, died of butthole cancer. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he's one of those evil kings that I covered in a previous video, so you can check that out if you haven't. Wink. Anyway, Ferdy's son Alfonso II took his daddy's throne but was quickly put in a state of check by French King Guy Charles VIII, who claimed that he had claim to the throne because of his noble Angevin bloodline. Or so he claimed. Little Alfonso was like, well, how about you just take Milan instead? Your lawn? No, Milan. Well, why would I want your lawn? I hate mowing. Are you serious right now? After some clarification, King Charles agreed, and with 30-some thousand soldiers, invaded Italy, took over Milan, but felt unsatisfied. Oh sweet, Charles took Milan. Oh, he's heading this way too. Why is he heading this way? Naples was also taken. With such a successful campaign through the peninsula, the French army, which consisted of Spanish, Swiss, Flemish, and even Italian soldiers, decided to celebrate. And you bet your sweet balls that meant women and alcohol were involved in medically inadvisable quantities. When you have a bunch of people from all over Europe quite literally come together in one city, there's gonna be some interesting results. This one was syphilis.
Actually, it was kind of like a super syphilis, as historians generally agree that the strain that went around was much more severe than its modern cousin that we are more familiar with. That is the rhetorical we, of course. This meant that the disease was much more contagious with symptoms that were much more severe. Since it was the Renaissance, let me paint you a picture of how it all went down. Your first step is finishing up your very consensual physical time slot with a local woman of the night. During your bi-weekly wash, you notice something around your own peninsula. You have genital ulcers, small open wounds forming around your tender meat log. But that worry is quickly put to rest as you develop a bad fever, multiple rashes, and muscle pain. Get used to that because you're gonna be like that for a few months. As you continue to live your now much more miserable life, you discover the formation of big, stinky, painful sores and abscesses across your body. These sores start to penetrate deeper and deeper into your tissue until your flesh quite literally rots to the bone. The bacteria eats away at your skin, your eyes, your nose, and your lips. You don't die just yet, but you wish you would. For months or even years, piece by piece, you fall apart, with chunks of your body just sliding right off. Got your nose? Oh. Thousands of people were walking around like this day in and day out. Eventually, the soldiers were expelled from Italy and returned to their respective homes. Within a few years, syphilis ran rampant through most of Europe, and by 1520, the so-called French disease infected Africa and Asia as well.
The year is 1939. It has been over 2.5 years since the end of World War I in 1918, a war that left European countries in shambles, but none more so than the country of Germany. At the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles essentially took Germany into a back alley and broke its political and economical legs, beating it within an inch of its life with no way to recover. With an economy and government in the toilet, much like today, Germans were angry, and they needed someone to be angry at. It certainly didn't help that with a name like World War I, there was an inevitability that at least one sequel would happen, and that is what the world is about to experience. Local starving artist and ball of anger Adolf Hitler, who was slightly more angry than his fellow neighbors, quickly rose to political power. He was the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as Nazis. The Nazis were able to garner mass public support thanks to their ability to uphold the political tradition of blaming someone else for your problems. And like any modern Gen Z teen, the Nazis quickly blamed capitalism and big businesses. However, they quickly realized that capitalists had something that they needed. So instead, they fell back to their next best plan: complete racial eradication. Hitler believed that bad apples spoil the bunch, so he would just get rid of the bad apples. Except these apples weren't apples, but people. Jews, Slavs, Poles, cripples, bloodles, furries, gays, and worst of all, Jehovah's Witnesses. With them gone, Germany can be a pure society and get back to being a world superpower with all the bratwurst and beer that they could ever want. Many German people thought that this was an absolutely wonderful idea, and so Hitler was made Chancellor to Germany in 1933, where just a year later, he promoted himself to Supreme Leader with total and absolute power, and no one thought that this was a red flag at all. But there was still a problem: the Treaty of Versailles. Well, it turns out that Hitler could easily bypass the harsh terms of the treaty by flat out ignoring them. So he did. In a few short years, he secretly beefed up Germany with shiny new soldiers and tanks, but he quickly realized that he needed something stronger than guns or bombs. He needed friends. It didn't take long for Hitler's influence to go viral, reaching far beyond the freshly shrunken borders of Germany. His push for regaining power and territorial expansion convinced both Italy and Japan to do the exact same thing. Italy wanted land back that it had lost in World War I. Japan wanted to conquer more Asian territory without the disapproving gaze of Uncle Britain and Aunt America just across the way. Staying true to his word, Hitler began invading countries and taking them for himself. First on his list were Austria and Czechoslovakia, but why? Surprisingly, no other country seemed to really care much at all, probably because they were too busy trying to figure out what a Czechoslovakia even was. As a precaution to future aggression, Germany sent a friend request to the Soviet Union ultimate master leader man, Joseph Stalin, who not only had a bigger country, but a bigger mustache. They signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which made Germany seem more intimidating on the world map having such a big friend on his side, even though his new friend was full of nothingness and snow. Hitler knew he could continue taking territories for himself with little opposition, so he continued to take land, but with much opposition. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded the Polish front, with the Soviet Union double-teaming the Polish behind shortly after. Now suddenly people care, and World War I-II has officially begun. Stalin and the Soviets did a lot of the initial heavy lifting, invading a lot of the EA countries, while Germany fought the easier to pronounce ones. Hitler then pushed into France, taking many pictures with the Eiffel Tower before being rushed away by other tourists wishing to do the same. Germany now only had one more power to face: Great Britain. But there was a problem. In the confusion and chaos, Britain had dug a moat around itself, making a land invasion impossible. But Germany had another trick up its sleeve: skyboats. Germany began bombarding Britain from September 1940 all the way until May 1941, destroying countless fish and chip shops in the process. Britain eventually retaliated with its own fleet of skyboats and defeated Germany during the Battle of Britain. Britain was also being supplied by a long-distance relationship across the Atlantic Ocean, the United States of America. Germany continued its conquest of Eastern Europe, mowing down Greece and Yugoslavia in early 1941, furthering Hitler's goal of having enough landmass to create the perfect race, while simultaneously murdering everyone along the way. But Hitler soon realized that the world was not procedurally generated, so he would soon run out of land to take. Hitler began to gaze longingly at Stalin's large and throbbing landmass, wondering if he could just have a little bit for himself, to which Stalin promptly said, "No." So broken was Hitler's heart that he devised a sinister plot to get what he wanted. Enter Operation Barbarossa. In one of the greatest anime betrayals of all time, Germany invaded the Soviet Union like a bunch of idiots. But surprisingly, Germany was moderately successful, reaching as close as 200 miles from the Russian capital of Moscow. If you've ever run 200 miles, you'd realize that that's not very close at all, and you'd also be very tired, much like the German soldiers. Despite being covered in snow and ice, Germans were surprised to discover that the Soviet Union was rather cold, particularly in the winter when things get cold. Thanks to their natural +50 frost resistance, the Soviets were able to push the Germans back, but now Germany found itself fighting two enemies at once, the British and the Soviets. But a new threat was waiting across the big water to the west, or east if you go far enough. While Europe was getting absolutely reamed, Japan had its own agenda, mainly trying to conquer China and the specific territories, specifically the Pacific. This was a huge no-no in the eyes of the United States, who wanted to first confirm if there was any oil worth taking. The US sent a letter to Japan stating that they will no longer trade with them. Japan, in return, decided to prank the United States by sending 360 planes to obliterate Pearl Harbor, a Hawaiian naval base. Unfortunately for Japan, the United States did not see the hidden camera just off to the side and immediately declared war. Germany then declared war on the United States, to which the United States had no choice but to declare double war on Germany. All hell was about to break loose. The Allied powers were completely speedrunning through the Pacific theater, island hopping all around between 1941 and 1943, hitting one gold split after another. They were going to take the World War II 80% record, and Japan was starting to sweat. Meanwhile, British and American forces had liberated the colonized northern Africa, pushing into Italy and giving Mussolini the boot in July of 1943. But Germans were not so quick to give up the spaghetti, so battles in Italy continued until 1945. The fighting pushed into Europe, with British, American, and even maple syrup soldiers storming the beaches of France on June 6, 1944, a day that will come to be known as D-Day, because of how nervous all of the soldiers were. With the Allied forces and the Soviets closing in on both sides, Hitler swiftly retired to his personal bunker to dine on a bullet with a glass of cyanide. With its supreme leader taking a supremely permanent nap, Germany had no choice but to surrender on May 8, 1945. Even as the sole remaining combatant, Japan continued to aggressively fight in the Pacific theater. United States President Harry Truman wished someone would just drop a huge bomb on Japan, so he did. Twice, and that was enough to end the war entirely. After the war, Germany was split and divided amongst the winners to prevent a World War II too. Any remaining Nazis were tried and executed, with some oddly having descendants in South America today. The United States briefly occupied Japan, sprinkling a hint of capitalism while dismantling their non-defensive military structure. Despite this, Japan prospered, but never forgot what America had done. In the coming years, Japan would unleash a secret weapon to exact their revenge and poison the rest of the world from within. Before the 1900s or so, doctors were kind of just taking shots in the dark as to how to cure their patients. Have asthma? Eat a bunch of boiled carrots. Severe fever? Pray to your Lord and Savior at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Eye irritation? Cut off the eyes of a crab and rub them on the back of your neck. It will never fail to amaze me the wild cures that medical professionals had back then. But to be fair, they were the ones at the forefront of modernizing medicine. They were the ones just trying to iron out the kinks of how everything actually worked through arduous trial and error. Today, I'm going to share with you 5 medical treatments that will make you go, that's pretty stupid. And the list starts off pretty strong. Tobacco enemas were all the rage in the 17 and 1800s and were used as a resuscitation method, like almost the exact opposite of CPR today. Back then, tobacco was thought as a sort of cure-all, capable of warming the human body and ridding it of all toxins. There's a story in 1746 about a man who pulled his wife from a body of water. Even though she appeared to have drowned, a passing sailor spotted the troubled couple. "Fear not, good sir," said the sailor. "I know just the cure. Here, take my pipe. Now, what you're gonna want to do is ever so delicately jam it up your wife's blowhole. Yeah, just right up in there. Then blow like the eastern wind in a galleon sails." The man reluctantly complied, inserted, and blew hard on the pipe. The story has a happy ending because the woman actually managed to survive somehow. Crazy, right? Yeah, I thought whoever wrote the story was just blowing smoke up my ass. Tobacco enemas continued to be popular for treatments of symptoms like headaches or abdominal cramping up until the 1900s, when doctors realized that was a bad idea since tobacco is carcinogenic. Speaking of headaches, they've existed for long as humans have had heads, which is to say a long while. If you've ever had a pounding headache, you probably wish you could just open up a hole in your skull to relieve the pain. Well, guess what our ancestors used to do? Yeah, there was a process called trepanation, which is actually the world's oldest known form of surgery, dating back some 6,000 years ago during the Neolithic era, the last part of the Stone Age. This procedure was typically performed on individuals who had symptoms ranging from headaches, head injuries, seizures, mental illness, really anything to do with your noggin. Not only were the holes believed to relieve head pressure, but to also release evil spirits crammed in there. So imagine Dr. Unga and Nurse Bunga delicately whacking at your melon with a rock because you decided to be extra silly that day. Speaking of silly, let's talk about an Italian chemist named Angelo Mariani. At the age of 25, he developed a miracle elixir that would aid in the curing of rather minute symptoms such as exhaustion, tummy aches, depression, and anxiety. By simply mixing a bold and flavorful Bordeaux wine with equally bold cocaine, you too can be fit as a fiddle. The drink became so popular in France that it was marketed overseas in the United States, where it inspired John Pemberton to put his own spin on the wine mixture. That is until the United States banned alcohol. But Johnny Boy wouldn't give up so easily. He created a carbonated alcohol-free alternative which still possessed the full Coke power. Speaking of putting your own spin on something, our next treatment does just that. Looking like a rejected nightmarish amusement park thrill ride, we have the whirling chair. The method behind this absolute unit of a contraption in the 1800s was to treat patients with mental illnesses like schizophrenia by completely scrambling their fucking brains into soup. Patients were strapped into the chair where an operator would then begin rotating it on a very tight axis, spinning faster and faster until the patient completely passed out. Which is beneficial because you can't be crazy while unconscious. Of course, losing consciousness in that fashion is due to the brain not getting enough oxygenated blood, which in fact will cause more brain damage. But hey, at least it looked kind of fun. Speaking of having fun, our last treatment requires me to address my male audience, which is probably most of you. Have you ever had difficulty performing for your partner? Can't quite satisfy that significant other in your life? Can't produce an offspring to call your own? Boy, do I have the remedy for you. Introducing goat nads. Yeah, they're just a goat's balls, but they could be your balls. Have you ever watched a goat fuck? I haven't, but I bet they would perform better than you, dork. This is probably the type of sales pitch that John Brinkley gave to his patients in the early 1900s. The man was a self-proclaimed doctor whose claim to fame was replacing vulnerable men's vulnerables with goat nuts. His process was not well defined and was often improvised on the spot, just Kobeing some goaty gonads into a patient's newly emptied sack. Sometimes he would replace them, but sometimes he might even just place the goat balls in there next to the current ones and call it a day. He had over 40 patients die on his table or from infection shortly after. Those who did survive experienced a placebo effect because no work had actually been done on their existing dangly bits. Those were the lucky ones. John Brinkley ended up making millions on the fraudulent procedure over 2 decades, but he claimed he was doing the impotent men a favor. You can also do me a favor by doing the thing and the stuff. So yeah, there's 5 medical treatments that were just plain bonkers. At least doctors are much better today and can more reliably save your life, only to put you in debt for the rest of it.